Prosecutors say Brian Goolsbee initially lied about his involvement, telling police he robbed Reagan Tokes but did not rape or kill her.
But prosecutors say over time that story changed, with Goolsbee leading investigators to the murder weapon. And detectives say Goolsbee confessed to the mother of his child that he was responsible for Reagan's death.
Prosecutors say they have the GPS, the DNA, and the physical evidence that links Brian Goolsbee to the kidnapping, rape, and murder of Reagan Tokes. But his defense attorneys claim that there are holes in that evidence. Prosecutor Ron O'Brien began his opening statement with that cold February day last year when a man stumbled upon what he thought was a mannequin in Scioto Grove Metro Park. It turned out to be the body of Ohio State student Reagan Tokes.
Psychology major who was looking to graduate in May of last year, who never made that graduation because she was executed, point blank, in the head, the handgun.
O'Brien said that handgun belonged to Brian Goolsbee, a convicted sex offender who had been trolling the Short North area of Columbus on February 8, 2017, looking for a victim. O'Brien laid out to jurors how, at the time, Goolsbee was wearing a GPS ankle monitor because he had been recently released from prison months earlier, something detectives with the Grove City Police Department only learned after Goolsbee's arrest.
That actually tracked him each and every step of that night of terror for Reagan Tokes.
O'Brien said that night of terror involved Tokes being abducted as she walked to her car, forced to withdraw money from an ATM, being raped along the way, and then shot twice in the head at the park. After Goolsbee's arrest, O'Brien said Goolsbee started talking, telling police he was responsible for the robbery, but not Tokes' rape or murder. That, O'Brien said, Goolsbee blamed on a man named TJ.
The state does not believe there was ever a TJ. It was a creation by him to avoid responsibility, and we think we'll be able to prove that during the trial.
O'Brien said Goolsbee's DNA from his cigarette butt and Goolsbee's DNA found on Tokes link him to the crime, and that Goolsbee led police to the gun and later confessed in a jail conversation with the mother of his child.
He took them to where the gun was. They wouldn't have found that gun had he not taken it. He dumped the gun there. And he dumped the gun in one sewer, and across the street he dumped 2 casings.
The defense team told jurors there are holes in the evidence.
The state indicated it will present DNA evidence. DNA does not tell you the how, the why, or the when.
Adding that the burden of proof is on the state.
When all the evidence is in, we will stand back up and explain what charges and elements within those charges we think the state did not prove. You will see that Mr. Goolsbee did not tell the complete truth in his interrogation with the officers. Few suspects do. But he's not on trial for not telling a complete statement.
Even before the start of today's trial, the defense had raised concerns that the prosecution was trying to sway the racial makeup of the jury. Prosecutor Ron O'Brien called that accusation laughable, pointing to the fact that 6 of the jurors are African American.
Jurors began their day outside the courtroom.
Prosecutors wanted the jurors to see the crime scenes firsthand, to get some perspective of these locations that they will hear so much about during testimony. The first stop for the jury this morning was Bodega, the restaurant in the Short North where Reagan Tokes worked. Prosecutors wanted jurors to see where they say Tokes was kidnapped while walking back to her car after getting off her shift. Jurors were also shown the locations of 2 ATM machines where investigators say Brian Golsby forced Tokes to try to withdraw money. They stopped at the alley in German Villiage where prosecutors believe Reagan Tokes was raped, and Scioto Grove Metro Park where Tokes' body was found. A makeshift memorial was covered with a tarp during the jury's visit to the site.
I solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give shall be the truth and nothing but the truth.
Back in the courtroom, prosecutors called the witnesses who were first on the scene when the body was discovered. Also taking the stand were several of Reagan Tokes' roommates who described filing a missing persons report after realizing Reagan had not come home.
We started calling hospitals and jails.
Friends described the panic that set in after Tokes disappeared.
Witness Richard Bonner did not want his face shown, but described to the jury how he had forgotten paperwork at a nearby coffee shop on February 9, 2017, and pulled into Scioto Grove Metro Park to turn around. That's when he noticed something.
I saw blood, dried blood, coming from her nostrils onto her face, and I knew that wasn't a mannequin.
2 other detectives also testified how they responded to the scene and discovered Tokes' body. A special agent with the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation talked about how he took photographs of the scene.
There was a gate. You mentioned there was a gate, and the information you had is that it had been opened around 6 a.m.
Yes.
It's a manual gate, right? Somebody has to actually physically go out there and lift it up.
I believe so, yes.
And so you're taking pictures, I think you indicated you got there around 2:30, right?
That's when I began my examination, yes.
Golsby's defense attorney hinted that the park had been open for hours before Tokes' body was discovered and asked about how the scene was processed. The defense did not extensively question Reagan's roommates, who confirmed this news.
She carried a black Kate Spade purse that had a pink lining on the inside, and then she had a nude wallet, which I believe was also Kate Spade.
Her friends described how they were able to identify Tokes as the victim.
That she had a tattoo of a small circle on her left side.
Her left side in the left rib area?
Yes, over her rib cage.
And what kind of tattoo was that?
It was just a small circle.
So did it signify anything?
It stood for karma.
Late in the afternoon, a plainclothes detective described his interview with Goolsbee after his arrest.
What did he tell you at that point for the first couple hours?
First couple hours, he told us that he had taken Reagan into a car, had committed a robbery of her. He needed money. He took her to some ATMs, and then he said he left her naked in a field during a snowstorm.
Jurors heard from 7 more witnesses today, and this is the third day of Brian Goolsbee's aggravated murder trial. And the focus today was largely on Reagan Tokes' car, her purse, and the gun that Brian Goolsbee allegedly had the day of the murder. BCI crime scene investigator Joshua Durst described the condition of Reagan Tokes' car when it was found on a street in Columbus after her murder.
This is that cigarette butt found just behind the driver's seat.
Prosecutors say it was DNA from the cigarette butt that led them to Brian Goolsbee. Prosecutors believe Goolsbee failed in an attempt to torch the car to cover up evidence.
When you opened the car doors, did you notice anything initially?
Yes.
What was that?
There was an extremely strong odor of gasoline inside of this vehicle.
You don't know when that burn spot was put on there. There's nothing that tells you it was left at a certain date and a certain time, correct?
That's correct.
And you're not an arson expert, correct?
That's correct.
Prosecutors also called a series of witnesses who described hanging out with Goolsbee the day of the murder and the day after, like Leonte Brown.
What would you guys do when you were hanging out?
Just chill, relax, smoke a little bit.
And friend Talia Nathan described Goolsbee showing up at her mother's home in North Linden in a puffy white coat.
He was there, said hello, and he told me that just to watch out for his coat because he had a gun in his coat and he didn't want my son to touch the coat.
Prosecutors also showed these images this morning of Brian Goolsbee on a Coda bus to the jury. They were captured moments before Reagan Tokes was kidnapped.
Testimony today also focused on the purse Reagan Tokes had with her the night she disappeared. Goolsbee's girlfriend, Hadashay Jackson, testified that Goolsbee gave her that purse in the back seat of Tokes' car just hours after the murder.
Is that the purse that Mr. Goolsbee gave you that early morning?
Yes, that's the purse.
And did he tell you where he got it?
No.
She said Goolsbee drove them to McDonald's. Prosecutors said it was in Tokes' car. During questioning a year ago with police, Jackson said the car smelled like gasoline. Prosecutors say Goolsbee bought gas to torch it. Jackson also said Goolsbee showed off a gun.
What kind of gun he showed? A little, I don't know, it's a handgun.
And it was police who then threatened to charge Jackson herself with the crime of tampering with evidence, as she had yet turned over Tokes' stolen Kate Spade purse, even after Goolsbee had been charged with her murder.
Under cross-examination, Jackson admitted that she was trying to use her relationship with Goolsbee for money.
What Mr. Goolsbee provided to you was money.
Correct.
And it was because you would ask him for money, right?
Correct.
And you told the detectives that you used him for money.
Correct.
You'd have the purse for a week.
Going on to, yes.
And you put your license and all your cards in that wallet.
Correct.
You made it your own.
Correct. He was so sweet and kind. I couldn't imagine him taking somebody else's life.
The ex-girlfriend of a suspected killer doesn't believe he's responsible for the crime.
Katisa Jackson ended up with Reagan Tokes' purse just hours after police say she was murdered. Chief Investigative Reporter Bennett Haverly spoke to Jackson afterwards about the present she got from Brian Goolsbee.
That present was a black Kate Spade purse. The problem is, police say it belonged to Reagan Tokes and was taken from her just hours earlier following her death. Now, even after learning of Goolsbee's arrest in this crime days later, Jackson tells me she didn't call police and didn't approach them. Actually, they came to her. And do you ever regret not calling police?
No.
Tawana at her house on 17th? Now, Jackson told me after testifying today that she was concerned for her 2-year-old child and didn't want to disrupt her own life. But during her testimony, she says that she met Goolsbee at a bus stop in early January of 2017, and the relationship there continued for weeks, with Goolsbee giving her money and frequently visiting her at her aunt's house in the North Linden area. Now, Jackson also told me more about their relationship, and I asked her if she had regrets after learning from police that that purse belonged to Reagan Tokes. When they told you it was Reagan Tokes' purse later on, I imagine that's what Grove City Police told you, correct?
Correct.
What went through your head at that time?
It was a very sad moment. You know, I didn't want it to. I never wanted to receive something of an innocent person that got that was in the predicament that she was in. I'm a mother. I never want that to happen to my children.
A chilling interview shared with jurors today in the trial of accused killer Brian Goolsbee, describing to police the murder of an Ohio State student, with Goolsbee claiming he was a witness and not the killer.
Despite the rather poor quality of the police recording of the videotape, jurors could not help but be pretty fully absorbed by the interrogation of a murder suspect and the evolution of his story. During the course of a 6-hour interview, Brian Goolsbee's story changed several times. Confronted with surveillance photos from ATM machines and gas stations, he admitted to holding Reagan Tokes against her will and forcing her to withdraw money from an ATM. He initially told detectives he drove her to Scioto Grove Metro Park and forced her out of the car. Goolsbee at first told detectives when he left her there she was alive. But in an attempt to get Goolsbee to provide more detail, detectives suggested to Goolsbee that he might have had an accomplice. And in time, he admits to having a gun, but tells a new version of the story as if he was a witness to the murder being committed by someone else he called TJ.
She falls. She's laying on the ground. I'm looking on the car. And he's been down, shoots her in.
Goolsbee provided a description of a TJ, but prosecutors and detectives say there is no TJ.
During the long interview, Goolsbee repeatedly denied his involvement in Tokes' death. But he admitted to getting $60 from an ATM. Detective Forney also recalled the words Goolsbee said Reagan Tokes said to him on that night.
She said, "All I want to do is live."
And there was an audible gasp in the courtroom after that occurred.
As the trial entered its second week today, jurors heard from several forensic scientists about DNA evidence linking Brian Goolsbee to both the victim and her car. But the most compelling testimony came this afternoon with the description of a jailhouse confession.
The mother of Brian Goolsbee's daughter testified Goolsbee admitted to her during a jailhouse visit in 2017 that he was responsible for the kidnapping, rape, and murder of Ohio State student Reagan Tokes. The woman asked not to have her face shown, so you'll only hear her voice.
I said, "Did you rape Reagan?" He shook his head like this. I started to cry.
So indicating yes for the
yes.
record.
And I asked him if he killed her. He shook his head yes. I dropped the phone and I left the visit.
The woman's friend, Brittany Stepp, later testified that she too was at the jail visiting another inmate and saw her friend get up and leave. She said Goolsbee apologized to her, saying, "I'm sorry, I got scared." Stepp said she later visited Goolsbee again last summer at the jail, this time alone.
Brittany Stepp says she thought of Brian Goolsbee as a brother. Her kids, she said, considered Goolsbee their uncle. She said she never knew him to be violent or abusive, and said while he was in jail, she asked him repeatedly whether he had committed the crimes, and he said no, until last summer.
He said, "I'm sorry, I got scared." I said, "Did you do it?" And he shook his head yes. I asked him why he did what he did. And I said, "Please don't tell me that you really did this." And that's when he admitted to me of doing what he did.
Tell us what he said.
He said that he kidnapped her, he robbed her, he raped her, and then he shot her at the park.
Defense attorneys are working to avoid the death penalty and under cross-examination questioned Brittany Stepp about Goolsbee's demeanor.
And when Mr. Goolsbee made these statements to you, you agree he said he was scared and didn't know what to do and he was sorry?
Yes, he did say that.
And he was crying when he gave you those answers, correct?
Yes, he had tears in his eyes.
A coroner later showed gruesome autopsy photos of Tokes and explained how 2 bullets entered her head. He noted that one injury appeared to have been at close range. Testimony from a forensic scientist with the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation appeared to back that up.
The DNA profile from the end or inside of the barrel was consistent with Reagan Tokes.
Prosecution rested its case this afternoon. The defense attorney says it plans to call no witnesses. Brian Goolsbee waived his right to testify in his own defense.
The fate of accused killer Brian Goolsbee now rests in the hands of a jury.
After 5 days of testimony, the jury heard closing arguments this morning and deliberated for the rest of the day.
In their final pitch to jurors, prosecutors tried to argue that this is a slam dunk case for them. Defense attorneys, though, told the jurors to take their time and to carefully examine all of the elements of each of the charges. In her closing argument, Brian Goolsbee's attorney, Diane Menashe, conceded that Brian Goolsbee committed the crimes, and that when he described to detectives the murder being committed by another person named TJ, he was, in fact, describing what he did.
We have done nothing to present to you a theory of TJ, because Brian is TJ.
The defense strategy is to avoid the death penalty. So what Menashe argued was that Goolsbee did not plan to kill Reagan Tokes, but that he got scared and panicked.
The state would have you believe that this guy is capable of prior calculation and design. And with all due respect to Mr. Goolsbee, if Mr. Goolsbee were that smart, he wouldn't have been wearing a GPS monitor while he's committing crimes.
Prosecutors, though, hammered away at the mountain of evidence against Goolsbee.
His DNA everywhere.
His DNA on the victim, Reagan Tokes. DNA on the cigarette butt in her car. Reagan Tokes' DNA on the barrel of the gun from being shot at point-blank range. Gunshot residue on Brian Goolsbee's sweatshirt. And testimony that Goolsbee confessed during jailhouse conversations. Assistant Prosecutor James Lowe said the murder was the culmination of a continuing course of conduct that night.
We'd agree he's not smart, but he's smart enough to plan. He's smart enough to know that if Reagan Tokes lives, she's going to come into court and point to him and say, "That's the man who raped me. That's the man who robbed me."
The jury is now back with the verdict. We have not heard that verdict yet, but we can look live, I believe, now at the downtown courtroom as people are coming in, and you can see the defendant, Brian Goolsbee, now on his feet, should be about to hear what the jury has to say.
They were expecting to sequester the jury overnight, but about when they were ready to put him on the bus, that's when the green light went on, alerting the court that the jury had reached a decision. Kind of a surprise announcement to some people in and around the courtroom. And of course, you see Brian Goolsbee right now in the courtroom.
It sounds like the judge is now coming into the courtroom.
Are you the foreman, sir?
Yeah.
Has the jury reached a unanimous verdict?
Yes, sir.
On all counts?
Yes.
Verdict: we, the jury in this case, being duly impaneled and sworn, find the defendant guilty beyond a reasonable doubt as to count 1 of the indictment for aggravated murder. Count 2, we the jury find the defendant guilty beyond a reasonable doubt of kidnapping. Count 3, aggravated murder, guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Count 4, aggravated robbery, guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Verdict for count 5, aggravated murder, guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Count 6, the rape count, guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Did indicate he had a firearm and did brandish, display, or use it. Count 7, aggravated murder, guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Count 8, tampering with evidence, guilty. Count 9, tampering with evidence, guilty.
These appear to be the death penalty specifications that the prosecution was asking for. This case, once it now goes into the guilt phase and they accept these verdicts, then the jury will have to consider secondarily whether or not, Mike, they want to put Brian Goolsbee to death for this crime.
What are your feelings now?
I still think that he's in a lot of pain. He's been in a lot of pain for a very long time. I think they need to look into that.
Brian Goolsbee spoke for the first time in court in a last-ditch effort to save himself from the death penalty.
Today I would like to apologize to the Tokes family for the crimes I committed against his daughter, friends, and family. When I first got locked up, I lied about everything. Said it was TJ. There is no TJ. TJ is not real. I made a TJ up because I was trying to whip him away out of the crime that I committed. But the only other thing I have to say is, please have mercy on me.
Regarding Goolsbee's statement to the jury this afternoon, asking for mercy, Prosecutor Ronald Bryan said it's too little, too late.
I think is very tardy, as well as it didn't appear genuine or remorseful to me as it was spoken.
Goolsbee's attorneys in this penalty phase of the trial are asking the jury to spare his life. They are detailing his difficult childhood and presenting evidence of difficulties throughout his life that they say worked against him. Jurors are now hearing about the life of Brian Goolsbee, about the abuse he suffered at the hands of his mother, Stephanie.
At age 5, Stephanie beats Brian with a belt and electrical cord on his ribs and back.
About how he was raped at the age of 12 and was bounced around in foster care.
Brian, without a father willing to take him in, is sent to foster care at age 13 for the 4th time.
Records show Goolsbee, as a teenager, repeatedly sexually assaulted younger children. Psychologist Howard Fredkin testified that his interviews with Goolsbee and his review of the records shows an extremely high number of adverse childhood experiences. Under cross-examination, Fredkin bristled at the idea that Goolsbee failed to accept treatment, arguing that Goolsbee was never properly treated for his own victimization.
They're labeling him just like you are, that he's just a bad apple and he's just uncooperative, without taking responsibility for looking at what is it that we're failing to do in this treatment program to help this man be able to heal and recover.
This isn't about Goolsbee's guilt or innocence at this point. Defense attorney Diane Menashe said it's about how Brian Goolsbee got to become the person that he is.
I'm not asking you to like him. I'm not asking you to feel sorry for him or pity him. But I am asking you to use your empathy to try and feel what it would be like to live through what he has lived through.